I've recently rewatched The Princess Bride for probably the third or fourth time this past week, and there's always a great question I like to ask when watching and rewatching a movie like that, which is, why is this so good? What about it makes it so compelling that I want to rewatch it, that I'm okay rewatching it? I think that's the same thing for everyone else, because it's a well-loved movie that, by all appearances, should not be as well accepted or well regarded as it appears, because it appears as a silly, campy fantasy rom-com. And despite the lighthearted jokes, the humor, and the general fantasy silliness of it all, The Princess Bride feels real. It's satisfying. The ending, we want to get it to the ending. We want to see true love succeed. We want to see Wesley succeed and win. We want true love to win, which is strange that despite how silly the story appears, we take it seriously. The story should be overbearing. It should be a sappy love story full of kissy stuff where it's overdone too much and kind of just a bad fantasy hallmark movie, where there's a romance, a young boy, a young girl, an evil prince, and some sort of misunderstanding, maybe a few minor inconveniences, but then at the end, true love overcomes the minor inconveniences with heavy plot armor, and the heroes easily win, the villains are defeated, ever after, and all that. But the story feels real. I've heard it from a lot of people, cynical people who like dark political, the Game of Thrones or any True Detective, these types of shows. They're like, oh yeah, Princess Bride, that's awesome. It's a great movie. I love it. And it's like, okay, this is not a movie that you would expect people to react like this. So the question is, how does it do it? How is it so good? Everything about this should simply be a bad, campy movie. And the reason why it works is because the story understands sacrifice.
Why loose your venom on me?
You killed my love.
It's possible. I kill a lot of people.
On the high seas, your ship attacked. And the dread pirate Roberts never takes prisoners.
I can't afford to make exceptions. Once word leaks out that a pirate has gone soft, people begin to disobey you, and then it's nothing but work, work, work all the time.
You mock my pain.
Life is pain, Highness. Anyone who says differently is selling something.
There is a cost. In fact, within the story, the cost for both Buttercup and Wesley is very high. They have to sacrifice an inordinate amount in order to achieve their happily ever after. In order for true love to win, there's an immense amount of pain and suffering and sacrifice and death that has to happen in order for them to achieve their ever after, in order for true love to win.
He's dead.
Just it's not fair.
Grandpa, wait. What did Fezzik mean he's dead? He didn't mean dead. Wesley's only faking, right?
There is a price for great gain. We all understand this. If you want something amazing, magnificent, there's a price for it because it turns out everybody wants it. So you have to be willing to pay for more than other people. You have to be willing to do more than other people. Now imagine this. I want $1 million. And then poof, what if I told you I've got it? It's actually right here on my desk. It seems unbelievable. You wouldn't believe it. I don't even believe it. And sadly, it's not the case. So let's try and change the situation. Maybe there's something I can tell you guys that would make me saying that there's $1 million on my desk more believable. I sold my kidney for $1 million. Suddenly, it becomes believable. What's changed? There's a price. Sacrifices involved. You could make it even more outlandish. I worked for 60 years in the factory, in the mines, in the coal mines, and made $1 million.
Mother, that's called a job!
And now it becomes even more believable, almost to the point of being boring. But the key here is that there is a genuine sacrifice and price paid for this amazing endeavor. For this wonderful gift at the end, there is a price that is paid. It feels earned. And so in a story, if the audience thinks that something is too easy, it's not valued. It can't be valuable. If you're trying to tell me that this is this great, amazing gift, but it just landed in your lap, and you didn't earn it, then why didn't it land in everyone else's laps? There's a lot of characters in this story. Why doesn't everybody have it for there? You have to answer this question because the audience is going to answer it because they're going to say, why don't I have it? I want true love. I want $1 million. I want an extra kidney. I want all this stuff. Why don't I have it? Why doesn't it just poof appear for me? You can't help it. And your story has to have an answer for this. So let's take Buttercup and Wesley. They fall in love, but they're poor. So now we have limitation. Wesley must journey forth to gain the money so he can marry, and you have this balance. Wesley, so you have something you want. You want true love, but you have to pay the price. You have to go away. In order to get your true love, you have to be willing to leave them. You have to go leave. And he takes a ship to go work the land and get some money, seek his fortune, and the ship is lost at sea and is presumed dead. The story throws out this potential for true love, a young budding romance, and then immediately pain and suffering and death. It's over. Bam, the romance is done.
I will never love again.
And so in the story, with every step of silliness or invocation of true love, of dreary-eyed, the young, beautiful couple and blah, 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 it's coupled with this aspect of true sorrow and pain. Wesley goes to make his way in the world and return and marry her and then dies at sea. And now Buttercup is ordered to marry the prince of the realm, Prince Humperdinck. She has no choice. And while she's, on the verge of getting married, she gets kidnapped and taken off to be killed. Despite how silly the whole affair is, nobody's really mincing the words. They're like, yes, we're going to kill you so we can start a war, which is going to result in the murder and, all the other stuff that goes along with war for a whole bunch of other people. They don't have a simple life. It's not this easy thing that just $1 million is not poof and popping up in their laps. True love isn't just falling out of the sky ready to hit them. So, Buttercup is captured and surely about to be killed. But then we have this balance, with all this suffering and bad things that are happening, we have something good that seems to happen. This mysterious man in black returns and battles his way all the way, defeats Inigo and Fezzik and outsmarts Vizzini and recaptures her seemingly. And he's even, saying, how could you betray me? And she's like, no, I did not betray my true love. And it's ta-da, it's Wesley. Of course it's Wesley. He's here with that mustache ready to rescue her. But then what happens? The prince is hot on their heels and they have to continue to flee. So you have this moment of, okay, we finally are together. Now we have to run. Now we have to run. Now we have to run because, he went to go seek his fortune and now he's the dread pirate Roberts. He's returned and he's rescued her. So now he's got his fortune and they can be together. But no, suddenly suffering and pain again. The prince is hot on their heels and they have to continue to flee through the fire forest and fight the rodents of unusual size and the lightning sand, only to get through all of that and be captured by the prince and separated again. And this is something that The Princess Bride does so well, is despite the true love, the kissy stuff, the fantasy setting, the story doesn't pull any punches. Wesley goes through hell throughout this entire movie. It's not an easy journey or anything like that. There are real consequences to the story. Once you get in a situation, despite the fact, Wesley's amazing and he's, amazing fighter, even then, the stakes are high. There's no escaping in the last minute because they're the main characters. Wesley's attacked and wounded and hurt by the rodents and the fire. We understand that there is a real cost to be paid to rescue Buttercup, that she is. And so what we're telling the audience and teaching the audience, what we, the audience, are being told by the story is that when there is a great price to be paid, what you gain is equally just as valuable. If you sell your kidney for that $1 million, we understand that there's an equivalent exchange going on for this price to be paid. And Wesley goes through all these trials to get Buttercup out so they can finally be together. And then they fight their way out of the forest just for the prince to come riding up with his hunting party with a 6-fingered man. They're captured and surrounded on all sides. And we, the audience, are just waiting to see how the main characters are going to get away, because they have to get away. It can't end that way. They can't die here. The story just started, so we have to see what's going to happen. But it can't be too easy. You can't get away with no cost because the story demands a price to be paid, because they're surrounded by this evil guy who has them completely at his mercy. So what are you going to do? What's going to happen from here? The prince promises to let Wesley go if Buttercup marries him, and she is willing seemingly to sacrifice herself for her true love. You see this sacrifice, it plays out again. And it seems too easy. Would the prince agrees, he'll take that deal. What from there, is it really going to happen that easily? And of course not. And once she makes that deal, the prince is just like, yeah, when she's out of sight, just kill him. And that's the deal. There's a trade that happens. You want there to be danger. When we're looking at a story, we want there to be danger, but too much danger, you have to have a reason for why the hero makes it out, or else it becomes campy or cheesy, because it's like, listen, despite all the odds that shouldn't be physically possible, the main character made it out. We don't understand and we don't agree with these. When something happens that's amazing or dramatic, there has to be a logic to it, an explanation to it. There's that great line from one of the recent Star Wars movies, somehow Palpatine returned, and we're just supposed to take it. And the movie's downhill from there somehow. We don't get it. We don't agree. It has to work with the logic of the story. If you have a gun pointed at the main character, the villain fires the gun, they can't just dodge the bullet unless there's logic to it. Okay, maybe they can catch bullets. Have we demonstrated that? Or are they just a regular human? If they're a regular person with no magical powers, they probably shouldn't be able to dodge bullets, because otherwise it breaks the logic. It feels like the rules are being bent, which means it feels less real. You have this logic that the audience is running continually while they're watching a story. If it feels less real, that means the victory isn't earned. It's not a real victory. After all, if there was never any danger, then none of it matters. The audience doesn't have to care, which means the story isn't interesting. And this is, the judgment audiences make. And if the story isn't interesting, then it's boring. And that's the worst crime you can make as a story. This is the balance that The Princess Bride has to figure out. You have a seemingly silly world, true love, romance, magical fantasy setting, and yet the consequences are real. This is something we understand. We live in the real world, and we say real world to understand and communicate the fact that if you mess up, that's it. There's no do-over. These are the consequences. You live in the real world because there are real consequences. This is why we stress so much over everything. That interview, that date, that discussion, that hard discussion with your parent, with your child, with your spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, because the moment matters. The consequences are definite. And this is the stark reality that pervades the story. There's a blend of talk throughout the entirety of it, of true love and this fantasy, but there's no shying away from the harsher realities of life. Buttercup is captured to the point where she'll die, and she's rescued by her true love, and then has to immediately sacrifice herself to try and save him. She still loses him, and then she's thrown in a situation where she's getting ready to threaten suicide if she has to wed the evil prince. And what this does is make this fantasy setting with love and all this other frills as something serious. And again, the logic is, if the cost is high, if the characters have to pay a cost, that means what they're paying the price for is valuable. And if it's valuable, it's serious, and that's something that matters. And if it matters, then we can be interested. We're drawn in because we want to see what's going to happen. Because if something valuable is at stake, we want to see what's going to happen. This is what pulls your audience in and makes them interested into your story. And Wesley is captured by the evil prince and the six-fingered man. And this is where we get to see the next level. How bad are the villains? You can have stakes that are high or dramatic or anything like that. But if the villains are like, no, Mr. Bond, I want you to die. I'm going to strap you to the table and then leave and give you a chance to escape because that's how evil I am. It's like, okay, whatever, we don't take it seriously. And it depends. If it's kind of a sillier movie you're trying to watch and you're trying to write, then sure, go for it, but just understand this is a reality you have to understand. They don't. In The Princess Bride, it turns out, they don't give Wesley the chance to escape. They strap him to a table and begin torturing him. This is the crazy thing, because it's always surprising how dark this story is. Because, you have Buttercup over here later on at this point in the story who's getting ready to be like, I'm going to end my life if this turns out to happen. This is really, really dark. And over here we have Wesley basically being tortured, and then something happens, Buttercup angers the prince and he runs in and tortures Wesley to death and he dies. And it's this is an incredibly dark story if you think about it, And what ensures that this story isn't just a horror movie of tragedy and depressing is, of course, the ending. Because, despite all of this that I'm going on about, all the darkness, all the pain, all the suffering, true love will conquer in the end. And that's why we're on for the ride. That's the reason why we'll rewatch it, because it turns out we will rewatch the story to see if true love wins. And again, kind of think of this in an alternate world. Imagine if there was a Princess Bride, a different Princess Bride, where Wesley and Buttercup were just minorly inconvenienced in order to achieve true love. It wouldn't feel like true love. It would be minor love or strong affection or passable niceties, this, surprising pleasantries even from there. It doesn't feel valuable. And so Wesley is tortured to death, and then he gets rescued by Inigo and Fezzik, but he's dead. And this is always the funny thing with this is just like, this part always would seemingly break the logic of the story, but it's because the characters have gone through so much that it doesn't feel cheap. It doesn't feel like, excuse me, let's check the script and see, the main character wins. They go and get a miracle and they revive Wesley. And it would feel cheap, except for the fact that we feel like Wesley has earned a miracle. He's not in a cell just sitting around, and then suddenly the guard forgot to lock the door and he runs away and gets away. He's gone through the worst torture known to man. He's earned it. We feel that he's earned the win. And so, yeah, we'll take it. The other thing is we want to see true love win. And if this is what it takes, then that's what it is. Because if the audience wants to believe in your ending, believe in the sacrifice your characters are making for this valuable end, they'll buy a lot of it. They'll buy a lot of this stuff. This is the reason why if you take this moment and put it in other stories, it's going to seem like, cheesy hallmark, because I'm the main character, therefore I win. We don't want the story to end there. We want to see where if they can do it, And so Inigo, Fezzik, and Wesley, they make an assault on the castle and break in. And it's this great moment where it's also a cool moment where you have these other two strong main characters who are looking up at our hero, our guy, Wesley, to see what he's going to do. As the hero, they see him as the hero because he's bested both of them. So it's this cool moment for them. They assault the castle and rescue Buttercup at the last moment. And then we have another moment that could feel, smarmy. It's where Buttercup says that Wesley will surely come for her. Despite the odds, it would never feel, and most of the time this would feel childish. But if she doesn't, if Wesley doesn't come, then she's going to, end her own life. And it's just like dramatic darkness that's going along right alongside with this, I believe in true love. It's this movie is constantly going back and forth between this really dark aspects to I believe in true love, the true love that comes once a century. And all of this goes in to support that because the stakes are real. Buttercup's pain is real. We can clearly see it, and this is what makes this seemingly silly story hit so hard. The falls and failures for the characters are real, and which means, on the flip side, that the successes are real. And again, if they're real, if the success of true love is real, then it matters. And if it matters, we're interested. We as the audience are interested. True love like this only comes once a century, and we want to see if it will prevail. And it turns out, I and a lot of other people will rewatch the movie year after year, again and again, to see if it will succeed. And despite all the odds, if it will succeed. And this is what makes The Princess Bride such a good movie. And it's one that's worth watching over and over again. Because even if you know the story, you still want to see it to the end. You want to see true love win. You want to feel that victory.
Maybe you could come over and read it again to me tomorrow.
As you wish.
That's kind of all I've got. Let me know what you guys think. My family has a tradition of rewatching the movie pretty regularly year after year, and I've missed out on the past few of them. So I finally got to see it again this year. Let me know what you guys think. Do you guys rewatch the movie? Do you agree with me? What do you think? And yeah, please do like and subscribe. I really like to hear from people, and I read just about all the comments. So please let me know what you think. And yeah, I appreciate you guys, and I'll see you in the next one.